Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation. Today's date is August 27th, 1996. The survivor is Henry Steinberg. The interviewer is Sue Steinberg. The city and state is Laguna Hills, California. The country is the United States of America, and the language is English.
My name is Sue Steinberg. I'm here with Henry Steinberg, no relation. Today's date is August 27th, 1996. We're in Laguna Hills, California. Okay, could you tell us your name and spell it for us, please?
Yes. My name is Henry Steinberg, S-T-E-I-N-B-E-R-G.
And your name at birth?
Heinrich Steinberg, H-E-I-N-R-I-C-H, S-T-E-I-N-B-E-R-G.
And when was your birth date?
I was born on February 24th, 1923.
And your age today?
My age today is 73 and a half.
And where were you born?
I was born in Berlin, Germany.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about, first of all, about what it was like growing up in Berlin. Did you have a large family?
Yes, we were a very large family. We had no immediate relatives, but we ourselves were father, mother, boy, girl, boy, girl, girl, boy, boy, girl. 8. 4 boys and 4 girls. And
where were you in there?
I was number 3.
And you said no immediate relatives in the area. Where were your relatives?
I had relatives in the United States and in Poland. My Polish relatives were on my father's side. My mother's relatives immigrated to the United States when my mother was still a young girl, and my cousins were all born in the United States.
Where in the United States were you?
In New York.
And what was your mother's name and maiden name?
My mother's name was either in Hebrew Hannah or in German Helene, H-E-L-E-N-E, and her maiden name was Fensterheim.
Okay. What was your mother like?
My mother was an incredible person. Raising 8 children, we never ate out. She did have some help occasionally when the babies were small, but by and large she did all the shopping, all the cooking, all the dressing, raising the children. My father actually worked at home. He was a custom tailor and had his own shop, but my mother took care of everything except my father's professional work.
Was your mother religious?
Yes, my parents were religious. We were raised religious. My German name must have snuck in there strictly for the outside world because nobody called me that. I was either called by my Hebrew name Chaim Leib or Chaim Aryeh, Hebrew and Yiddish, or I was called Heini outside, but Heinrich was not my name at all.
So when you were in the outside world, with
yes,
one name?
For school, for anything that had not to do with our immediate family. I was Heini, inside, Chaim Leib.
And your father's name?
Isaac.
And whereabouts in Poland were his family from?
They are from outside Krakow. The actual village where my father was born was Jolin, or Jolina, and my mother's from Ishana Gedolna. I have never been there, but I know that they're both very close to Krakow, like suburbs of the city of Krakow, which is really the area that had at one time or other belonged to Austria and at another time to Poland, but we consider ourselves Polish, and my parents lived there at the time when it was Polish.
What was Berlin like? What do you remember of the city?
There are 2 Berlins that I remember. The inside Berlin, you see, my parents, even though they were not Hasidim actually, they were modern Orthodox, but they liked the religious life of the Hasidim, and at first we lived in an area that was less Hasidic in environment, but about 10 years before Hitler's era, we moved into the area where there was more Jewish really like Brooklyn might be one time, very Jewish. And since the nearest shul or synagogue to where we lived was the Radomska Hasidim, which means Hasidim who came originally from the city of Radomsk, I was raised in that kind of environment. They were very close to us. We prayed there whenever we could go to services. That was the inside. That's how my friends were too. Most of my friends were from that same background. The outside was the Berlin world. Berlin was a beautiful, large city, tremendous transportation, museums, parks, everything you could want. And the fact that we were Jewish and lived an inside life didn't have any effect on our outside life. We went on tours and on hikes and took part in everything as if there were two separate lives.
Did you have non-Jewish friends?
No. Well, I wouldn't say entirely, among the neighborhood friends, there were some that weren't Jewish, and we'd go to the nearest park and play soccer together or anything like that, and it didn't matter until 33.
What kind of school did you go to?
I started off in a Jewish grammar school. I have to mention here that in addition to going to school, we all went full-time to Cheder, to religious school. So that, again, there's that double life. We went to public school, but we spent a lot of time being educated Jewishly as well. The public schools were, to begin with, Jewish. Just in 1933, I entered a non-Jewish prep type of school that would go through the lower grades into the junior college grades. But that was short-lived because a year later, Jews had to get out of that school, and I was back in a Jewish school.
How was it explained to you about your having to leave the school? Did you understand what was going on?
I must have understood it well, perhaps because we were taught Jewish history as well as other Jewish subjects, and Jewish history has been one of persecution. And the way I recall it, my reaction when all of this started was, here they go again. And let me, if I may, say something about the they being the Christian world. I, to this day, have a very, very bad feeling. Not about all Christians, just like they said some of my best friends are Jews. But I say that this whole thing is a Christian problem, and whenever I have the occasion, the opportunity, I will say how I feel about the Christians. Because to this day, really, there are a lot of Christians who still say, we are the devil, we are children of the devil, and that has stayed with me.
Did you hear a lot of that? I mean, were people, kids your age, saying that to you? And
openly anti-Semitic. Once the propaganda started, it was just like a new scene, a new era had begun. All of a sudden, we were the Jews. And, even though the worst came in 38, when it started with the Kristallnacht and so on, but it was already happening. We could see what was going on, and we were the Jews. And non-Jews were basically not allowed to be seen together with us. Remember, I was still a child at the time.
How did that, how did you feel about that? Did you have memories of specific things that, anti-Semitic incidences? Do you remember as a child when it first started up, before Kristallnacht, in the early years? Like you said, it didn't just happen, it led up to it.
Yes,
what were some of the earlier
there were
things?
incidents. The Nazis loved to march. That was one of their favorite pastimes. They would have columns of Nazis with their uniforms, and I had seen them prior to 38, every once in a while, living in a Jewish district. When they would see a Jew with a beard going along the street, and they just pulled by his beard, knock him down the street, things like that I saw.
What would people do?
The German people just laughed, and the Jewish people just waited for it to blow over, and somebody would maybe pull him into his house, and I didn't stay around long enough to see what was the action taken beyond that, but I have seen incidences like that.
What about the teachers in school before, before the public school? Did they treat you differently? Were there incidences?
The 1 year that I spent at the non-Jewish school, I was 11 years old. And basically there was just the awareness. These are the Jewish kids and these are not. But there was no roughing up at school at all. School, the subject didn't come up either, not in class, not outside class. It was only in the social activities, in the street activities, where it began to build up very quickly.
And what were your parents? Were they explaining to you anything, or did you ask them what was going on?
I don't think that they explained. Among our own age group, we talked about it. And it seems to me quite incredible that not enough people saw the writing on the wall back then, because the mentality seemed to be, this can't get any worse. Each time it escalated, the idea was, this can't get any worse. What are they going to do to us? We fought in their wars, especially the German Jews. They started wearing their military medals, started talking about, we fought for the German Reich. They're not going to do anything to us. That's just ridiculous. This man, somebody is going to put them away sooner or later. They just didn't believe that what did happen could possibly happen in what was considered a civilized country.
I just want to go back a little bit, and I just want to ask you about the Jewish life in your home. Did you have any favorite holidays? Was there a favorite time for you?
Yes, Hanukkah inevitably was a favorite holiday. That was when we were given presents and the lighting of the candles every night, from 1 candle to 8 candles. The high holidays were full of atmosphere. It was just packed with this Yiddishkeit. That's the best term for me to use. The Jewishness was just so thick you could pick it up in buckets. If you went in shul, you were at home, whether it was a kiddush or whether it was at the end of Shabbat the Havdalah or whether it was the meals themselves, everything became very festive. We were, I would say, lower middle class. We were not really comfortable financially, and there were 8 kids to feed, but when it came Shabbat or when it came holidays, it was just a different world. You took on a different soul, so to speak.
What about grandparents? Were your grandparents around?
Well, no, my only grandparent that I knew was my mother's mother. She lived with us in Berlin and died at the same time when Hitler's people came to power. In January of 33 is when she died, and in January 33 is when Hitler became, devil.
And her name, your grandmother?
Her name was Sima Fensterheim, my mother's maiden name, and she had her own room in our house, and we often saw her, but she rarely came out. My mother took care of her in addition to taking care of us, and she wasn't considered in those years, must have been an old lady, and as I was only 10 years old when she passed away. I don't have too many recollections of what she really was like.
Well, and I wanted to ask you the age difference between the oldest and the youngest child in your siblings.
Okay, my brother, number 1, was born in January of 1920. My sister, the youngest, was born in 1933. That fateful year, 1933.
Were you bar mitzvahed?
I was bar mitzvah at the Hasidic, Radomska Hasidim, at the shul. It was not the type of bar mitzvah that you find today in a modern setting. You were 13 years old, you were a man, and you got called up to the Torah. You learned to do the Torah and the Mafti and the Haftorah, which is something that I really appreciated, to be honest about it. And you were counted for the minyan, but there was no big party. There was no dances or anything like that. It was, even for that era and for that city, it was very low-key. It was the religious thing that mattered, not the social.
Do you remember what portion you had?
The portion was Jethro, and I was taught not just to do the portion. You see, the whole Torah, all of the Torah is based on about maybe a dozen notes, and not in the parchment Torah, but in the book, each word has its own note. And if you learned all the basic notes, you could then read it just like if you learned to read music, and if you see a piece of music, then you could sing it or play it or whatever. That's how I was taught. And that means to this day, somebody can say to me in synagogue, Joe was supposed to do the Haftorah, he isn't here, could you do it? And without preparing, I can do it. That's because I got good basic training from my bar mitzvah.
Tell me about, again, your experiences. We'll move ahead a little bit. About as things were changing and you had to go back to the Jewish school. Were you ever like in fear? Were you frightened of what was going to happen, or how did you feel?
No, I wasn't frightened. It was kind of a bravado feeling that I had, because I looked like a real non-Jewish boy. I had blonde hair, I had gray blue eyes, I at that time had a straight nose, and at that age I deliberately walked and was probably sent out into the trouble areas, and I did this even on Kristallnacht. I was sent out there to see what's going on and to come back with reports. And that sort of made me feel, I really know how to make myself anonymous.
Were your other siblings darker, or were you the only one that looked?
No, my sisters were also blonde, but they wouldn't have a girl do that. I mean, the difference in gender was incredible. Girls were girls and boys were boys, and there's a total vast difference between them. But my older brother had dark hair, and the other two were too little, really. The next boy after me was 5 years younger, and the one after that 7 years younger.
So you were sent out to scout out, and what sort of things would you see? What did you?
Well, do you want to hear about Kristallnacht, or?
Sure. Why don't you tell me?
On Kristallnacht, and they call it Nacht, but actually it went on throughout the day too. I went to the areas where the Jewish stores were concentrated in that section of Berlin, and I lived in an area too that was very heavily Jewish, with stores and population. So first of all, I went to the area immediately near us, and I saw synagogues on fire. I saw books, parchments on the ground being set on fire, piled up, gasoline poured over it, and I saw them attack Jewish people walking around, and I was a bit of in a trance. But I did see, then I went further beyond the immediate area, took a bus to some place, and I saw some of the larger Jewish stores. A lot of the retail business was in Jewish hands then too. And I saw them being totally destroyed too.
Were you ever stopped, or did you ever feel?
Nobody ever stopped me.
You kept going, and
I just kept going and looking, and just, I mean, again, even in 38, I was 15 years old. I wasn't really old enough to have a full realization. It was more like, well, it's happening, and I'm watching it all and trying to keep mental pictures of what I saw.
were you surprised when it happened, or could you see it leading up to it?
I absolutely saw them leading up to it. It was inevitable. This man, Hitler, was such a raving, crazy person. He spoke, I don't want to make any comparisons with some of our today's non-friends who also have very big talent for making fiery speeches. I won't name names, but he was that tight. He could stand there and talk and scream and yell and curse, and every second word would be the Jews. All our problems are caused by the Jews. If we get rid of the Jews, it will never happen to us again. We will be conquerors of the world. This was his constant theme from 33 on. And so when it happened in 38, all I could say was, it was coming. If I can inject something here, 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks, on the 28th of October, but 12 days before Kristallnacht, they had the deportation of Polish Jews. Can I elaborate on that?
Sure.
Okay.
Please.
Fortunately, my father had a friend who was in some way connected, neighbor or whatever, with one of the local policemen. That policeman told my father's friend, and he told us that, whether it was 2 days or 3 days before, that all the Polish Jews are going to be sent back to Poland. It'll be a one-day affair. If you don't stay at home that day, you'll be safe. Sure enough, we went to somebody who was not Polish, to the house. We stayed there for the day. We came back the next day. We had no further problem, but we did know that all those who were not warned, it was in the paper, on the radio, were sent just to the border between Germany and Poland and left there. And all kinds of things happened to those people. Some of them came back, some of them stayed in Poland. I don't really know if there is a record particularly of what happened to them, but all the Polish Jews that they could pick up, the German police, were sent to the Polish border. There was one sequel to this. Many, many months later, shortly before I went to England, I lived in a place outside Berlin where I was being trained for agricultural work in Israel. That was, of course, the big goal. And they finally caught up with me. They sent me a letter, as stupid as it sounds. They didn't just come and pick me up. They sent me a letter, and I have the letter somewhere. On this given date, we are going to come and pick you up at this place where you are now, and be forewarned, you are not allowed to take any luggage other than a container no larger, to translate literally, than a briefcase. That will be your baggage. So please be there. We will come and pick you up. Well, of course, I wasn't there. In the meantime, went back home, made my preparations to go on what had been already developing as my trip to England. So that blew over too. But it's an interesting, not often mentioned matter.
Do you know people that did actually show up in that? Did people go?
I don't remember whether some people were picked up there, but this was addressed to me personally, and whether there were others who got the same letter, I have no recollection at all.
And there's a thought, I mean, you never would have gone, you would not have gone, you would have defied it, you would not have...
Well, yeah, it was just, I didn't have to give it much thought. The fact that I was just able to take that same day the train home, that was my solution. I mean, there were so many things happening. You didn't go into detail about everything. You just kind of sort of got the action. This was happening. This is what you need to do. It's like when you're walking across the street and you see a car coming, you jump across. It's sort of like instinctive.
So there were preventative things that you would do. But did you ever, I mean, did you get the sense, I know you were young, but did you get the sense, as others did, like those wearing the medals, that it was going to blow over, that it wasn't going to last very long?
Not by that time anymore, no. The German army had been showing off all the things that they were capable of doing. The tanks were sometimes rolling through the streets. Oh, no, no, no. I knew that there was only one thing to do, get out. And I got caught up in this motion, in this movement of people getting out. My friends, my peers, so many others. When I was on my way to England, it was simply a continuation of what had preceded it. It was all so natural, somebody was setting up to go to England. No, not many interviews, not much tremendous preparation, no big shopping trips. This is what we have in the house. Here's your case. We take you to the station, and off you go to England. And there's my friend Eddie, and there's my friend Betty, and so on and so forth. That's how it works.
Okay, and we will get to that, and I want to find out the details of that. You had mentioned about Hitler. I was just wondering, had you ever actually seen him speak?
I have seen him once, yes. I don't remember exactly what period this was, between 33 and 39, probably closer to 39 because I was probably too young when he first started. But I did see him at one time live in one of those mass rallies which they held constantly.
And did you go in again acting like you were non-Jewish?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, if anybody would have recognized me, it would have been the end of me. But I just took it for granted that these are multitudes of people who's going to prompt recognize me.
Why did you go?
Why did I go? Oh, it was thrilling for a 14 or 15-year-old boy to pretend that you're one of them and just act like them. When everybody went, Zikal, Zikal, I went, Zikal, Zikal. And in my mind, I said, Yemach Shemom, may he be blotted out. But it was easy.
Do you think there were many like you who were in that crowd?
I doubt it.
So you could see how everybody was swept up by the...
I mean, you see, when you put it in the historic background, the German people were very, very much upset about the fact that they had lost the First World War. And here comes this man who wasn't even a German, he's an Austrian. And he tells them, I'm going to fix all of those rascals who beat us in 1918. We're going to come back and we're going to show them that we Germans, we are the master race. Or you Germans, because he couldn't really call himself German. And they just loved it. I mean, it's like taking a bunch of 10-year-olds and tell them, hey, see all of these roller skates? Which one would you like? Which one would you like? Which one would you like? And they'll all grab a roller skate and, you know, try them out. That was how they were with this political insanity. They all had flags and armbands and uniforms and these goose-step marching. They just thought, they really believed that this was their salvation, that finally Germany is going to show the rest of the world that they can conquer the world. And I've never heard anything more idiotic in any historical era than that.
Now, going back again, you said that your father, did the whole family hide out at the non-Polish
yes,
household?
at that time we just all went, all of us, all 10 of us, and just slept on the floor and waited for the morning and just went home. It was walking distance.
Were they Jewish?
They were Jewish people, but not Polish.
Did your family ever try and make arrangements to move out of Germany, to try and get out and leave the country?
Well, they should have certainly done more than they did. There were two factors. Number one, the general principle, it isn't going to happen. It will blow over. Somebody's going to just hang him to the nearest tree and things will be back to normal. And number two, and this is strange because my brother, who lives in Israel, who wrote his autobiography, expressed the same thought that I'm going to express to you now. Many people, including our parents and evidently their friends, all had this idea. Men have to get out. Women, they wouldn't touch a woman, they wouldn't touch a girl. This was, of course, so mistaken. But that is why in our family, and maybe other families too, the idea of women being safe was such a fallacy, and yet they believed it.
Okay, we're going to stop tape now. Okay, when we left off, you were telling, and it was a good point, that the women, they thought the women were safe, that no one would hurt the women and children, but what happened? What did your dad do? Because you felt that the men had to leave because it was the men that they were after. What did your father do?
Well, my father also seemed to be most concerned about his safety. So at one point during that period, he was picked up by the police and sent to a place near Berlin, where other people were sent. And I was already gone by that time, and my mother didn't really know what had happened to him. This was after the outbreak of the war. They were still in Berlin. My father and mother and 4 girls and 1 boy who left shortly after that. That's again a different story. But after my father was picked up, he was sent home again, and he was given 10 days to leave the country. Now, why this happened, I don't know. But I found this out from my brother who lives in Israel, and my father also spent the post-war years in Israel, and that's how my brother found out, and that's how I found out. They told him, if you leave Berlin within a few days, 10 days, let's say, you can go wherever you want to. So what did he do? He found out about the group that was going to go in those ships that went illegally. That is illegally because the British blockaded the Mediterranean. They didn't let any Jews in other than those which had a certificate, as we called it, to enter Palestine. So my father knew about this group that was going illegally, so he joined them. Left my mother and 4 sisters still at home. He joined them and got on one of those. I can't call it a ship. It was literally a paddle wheeler. It might have crossed the river. Could never have crossed the Mediterranean. But the good news is that the ship broke up about half a mile from the coast, wherever they left, I think from Italy. And some people unfortunately drowned, but my father and most of the other people on ship, there were several hundred, were taken back to mainland Italy. They were put in a camp under the protection of the International Red Cross. He survived those years in that camp together with his shipmates, loosely speaking, and after the war, the British allowed him, because he in the meantime had a son who made his way to Israel, and that's again a separate story. Anybody has relatives in Israel or Palestine can leave tomorrow. So he went to Palestine, Israel, there and then, and reunited with my next youngest brother.
And his name?
His name used to be Willie, W-I-L-L-I, and of course is Ze'ev, which is the Hebrew Jewish equivalent of his name, which was his Jewish name given at birth too.
So when the Germans said you have 10 days to leave, they meant him, not he and his family.
No, just him.
Just him.
Again, at that time, the women were left alone. That was the worst part. Whether they changed their plans or whether this was for some other ulterior motive, who knows? The fact is, they picked up my father with other men, they sent him to this place, they sent him back after a short while and gave him so many days to get home.
Now let's talk about you in the meantime. You said you had already left, but what led up to, were you in an organization, were you in a group? How was it that you were able to leave, since obviously the whole family couldn't get out?
No. There were different means for families to get out. Now, some families had relatives in America and they wrote the necessary papers. If they qualified financially, they went to America. Others had relatives in South America, and we know people among our parents' friends who went to South America.
Now, you had relatives in America.
I have relatives in America, but that was previous generation. So in other words, my parents' generation went to America from Europe.
Did your parents try and write to them and say, can you get us into America?
I doubt it somehow. I doubt it. I still think that they, with many, many other people, just either were unwilling to leave or just were so bewildered by it all that they just didn't know where to go. Otherwise, they wouldn't have all been stuck in Germany. But I really don't know what went on in their minds. The fact is that there were people who were leaving, going to different countries. Now, there were all kinds of people leaving in all kinds of directions for all kinds of reasons through all kinds of organizations. I belonged to what we called in those years Bachad, or which is an acronym of Brit Chalutzim Dati'im, religious Chalutzim, religious pioneers, children's organization. And through them, among all the various other Jewish organizations, my name was on somebody's list, which my parents had obviously placed together with other siblings. And this is how I was told eventually that on this date, on the 20th of September, wait a minute, when did the war begin? 20th of August. On the 20th of August, like 10 days before Germany invaded Poland and 3 days before, 13 days altogether before England declared war on Germany,
1939.
I was told, you go to this and this station, and my father took me there, and I saw a lot of familiar faces and a lot of people, of course, that I didn't know, and we all were put on this train, and we just sat there. We were totally stunned, because by that time, at age 16, you already were a little bit more aware, and we just sat pretty much muted and exhausted until we came to the Dutch border. When somebody said, we are out of Germany, we just went wild. On the train, we danced and we sang and we whistled and we did everything. And you want to hear more about the trip?
I do, but I want to ask you, did you think this was a temporary thing, that you were leaving just for a little while? I mean, what did you think?
I was thinking that I was going to England so that I could go to Palestine. That was the ideology. And for people who had been used to praying, there are so many prayers about returning to the Holy Land, returning to Israel or whatever, so that this to me was, you see, I was already aware that there were quite a few Jewish people who had left from Eastern Europe prior to this era and who had started settlements and cities in Palestine. And I was part of that movement, at least ideologically.
Do you remember what was the last moment saying goodbye to your mother and your sister?
I only remember saying goodbye to my father because he took me to the train. And I remember that handshake, the kiss, the hug, and a little patch, Gegesundheit. We go, yeah, out of here.
So you never got to say goodbye to your mother or your sister?
I mean, I saw them the day before, or even probably in the morning I left, but I have no recollection at all about saying goodbye to them. And two of my brothers had preceded me to England. I was the third one of the four boys who went to England.
And they left how much before you?
My older brother left in January, which was a lot simpler, a lot less complicated. And again, I have to refer to that. When he left in January, being a Polish citizen, he went to the Polish consulate in Berlin. He said, I'm David Steinberg. This is my nationality. Would you please give me a passport? I have all my documents to go to England. He got his passport. He went. I went in August, 8 months later. I went to the Polish consulate. First of all, they were already fully anti-Semitic, without a question. But the first thing they said to me, you speak Polish? And I said, no, German. Why don't you speak Polish? I was born in this country. You never been to Poland? No, I've never been to Poland. Why do you want a Polish passport? I have my papers. I want to go to England. That's all I need is your document. My brother did it, no problem. We'll have to send away for your files to Poland. And of course, that was literally saying, get out of here, we don't want you. It just so happens, again, you know, there's lots of information crisscrossing all the time. I already heard in the meantime that there is a Polish consulate in a nearby town that might do it. I looked more into it, nothing doing. They already knew about it. Ah, there's another way. Go take the train to ABC place, whatever it was. Go to the Germans. Tell them you're a Polish citizen. The Poles refuse to give you a passport. Don't do it in Berlin. It's only Nazis. But you go to a police outside Berlin, you'll get a passport. Jim did it, or Frank did it, or whatever. They will give you a passport. They did. I mean, I had to take the bus, I ended up walking, but it was all, you were so motivated, nothing could stop you. I got a passport for foreigners of German location, locale. And it said inside the passport, nationality Polish. I was Polish. They just substituted for the Polish passport that the Poles wouldn't give me. They gave me a German, what they called a Fremdenpass, a passport for foreigners, which is what I was. I was a foreigner in my birth town.
I was going to say, why were you considered a foreign? I mean, you were born in Berlin.
Because your parents were Polish, you were Polish. That was the law. No second guessing. If you were Hungarian, your parents were Hungarian, you were Hungarian, whatever nationality. You were not German because you were born there. This is not the States. So anyway, I got this passport and it said in it, nationality Polish. When I came to England, the official at embarkation didn't even open the passport. He must have had 1,000 Fremden passports on that day or during that week, and just entered me as stateless. It changed my life. If you want more information, I'll tell you, but it changed my life. Nothing.
What,
in how far? Okay, the war was on, and my brother, who was Polish, which was an ally of Britain, as a Polish citizen, you had to go in the British Army. They had their own Polish regiments, but they told you can either join the Polish regiment or you can join the British regiment. He joined the Royal Air Force. Now, I had this younger brother who, in the meantime, we reunited in Manchester. He was at that time 10 years old. I was his mommy, I was his daddy, I was his everything. Now, if I would have been Polish, if that immigration officer had made a mistake, I would have been drafted. Whether I wanted to go or not, I would have had to join the British Army. Now, I'm not proud of the fact that I didn't serve in the military. I did serve in the civil defense, the air raid wardens and things like that, which I was a member of during the war in Manchester. But my concern at that time was, I have suffered, I have given, I have lost. I have this one sibling here, and I'm going to take care of him even if I have to ask for a military exemption. That was my concern. Because I was accidentally made stateless, I was not in any category. I want you to know that among my siblings, the Jews that were German, and I'm sure you know about it, most of them in England were interned as enemy aliens. But that again is a story that must have been told before. One of those incredible things. If you were not an ally, you were an enemy. You don't ask whether you're Jewish. You don't ask whether you're a refugee from Nazi oppression. You are an enemy alien. We are going to have to intern you.
Because it's a German.
Intern them as enemy aliens. There were other countries. I think Hungary also was an enemy alien to Britain. Hungarians were also interned. And the internment took on all kinds of manners. Some of them were just simply sent to the Isle of Man, which is very close to mainland England. Some of them were sent to camps, I think, inside England. Some of them eventually were allowed to join the military despite their enemy status. And some of them were sent overseas. They loaded ships full of these, quote, enemy aliens, sent them to Australia, sent them to other countries. There was at least one ship that was bombed by the Germans and full of Jewish refugees from England. The boat sunk somewhere in mid-ocean. So it was a wild state of affairs.
Let me ask, how did your younger brother come to England? How did he get out?
Oh, you were really fishing for stories. Another story.
Well, I mean,
okay. My younger
how did he get
brother
out?
was also signed up by my parents and got caught up also in this Kindertransport and was sent to England. And at that age, they wanted a family in England to give them a guarantee that they will look after him. And so there was a family in London, a Jewish family named Moss, when they had to pick somebody to sign a guarantee for, my kid brother's name came up. He was the one who went to family Moss. Sometime later, my older brother went to London to say thank you to the Moss family for allowing our brother to come to England. Met the Moss's daughter and married and they live in San Francisco, and this is going back to the 40s.
It's wonderful. So tell me again, I want to go back because you did say when you were on the train and when you crossed the border, the celebration. How many of you were on the train? Young people?
Must have been hundreds and hundreds, because these Kindertransports all took place between December 38 and beginning of the war, end of August of 39. So in that 7-month period, 10,000 children, apart from some families which were allowed to enter England, but 10,000 children were sent to England. And I was just one of them, and the idea of being out, that was put you in a mental state, like really being up in the clouds. We were so full of this jubilation, all of this frustration, all of this not being able to be seen in the streets of Berlin, and all the other numerous restrictions. It was all thrown off. Hey, you were a new human being. And I mean, I'm not the only one. All of us felt that. We just, once we got to the first destination, we just danced the horror till we dropped.
You thought that England was a temporary...
It was intended to be, yes.
How long did you think you'd be there before you were off to Palestine?
As soon as the war's over.
And were you one of the older children on the Kindertransport?
Well, the youth Aliyah group that I was part of were all between 15 and 17. The Jewish agency or whoever set up those regulations, they determined that if you're 15 to 17, you're youth Aliyah. I was right in the middle. Some of them were 15, some of them were 17. I was 16.
Now, were your sisters ever signed up? Could they have gone?
I know that I found out later that one of my sisters went to the same place for agricultural preparation that I was when I got this letter that they're going to send me to Poland. We received the pictures to my father, who had it on him when we went to Palestine. She was in one of those places, but eventually rejoined my family, and they were all, I don't know whether separately, whether she went separately, but I went to Yad Vashem, and she was in a different part of the list, but the same date, I believe it was December 1940, or so, I forget what the date was, but they all were eventually sent to Auschwitz early during that period.
And which sister was that?
The oldest one, Peppy, she was the one who had been to this place called Steckelsdorf, and I know that she eventually went back to the family.
Okay, so maybe she could have
Could have been together with them on the transport, or may have in some way been separated. But as far as I remember, the Yad Vashem record shows the same period of all of them dying in Auschwitz.
Wait, that's how you found out what had happened. On the train, was it mostly young boys that were leaving? Was it boys and girls?
Both boys and girls. Several of them in my immediate group were together with me in that place, again, that I keep referring to, where I was training for agricultural work. Some of my own buddies were in that same group with me, and went to the same place where we had this temporary tent camp. It was in Kent, near the southern coast of England. That's why we didn't stay there long, because they evacuated all of the people in the south of England, preparing for a possible German attack by planes or invasion or whatever. I mean, there was enough fever there that things were going to heat up pretty quickly. They didn't heat up that quickly, but they did send the group that I was in to North Wales, out in the country, which was a different ball game because you couldn't tell there was a war on being in North Wales.
Life was normal?
Well, we were, some very generous Englishman gave us his castle, which was, as it so happens, not an acknowledged castle by the authorities in England that acknowledges castles, because this man was a very rich man who said, I don't need to go through the usual rigmarole, I'll build my own castle. And he built himself a beautiful castle. This must have been early this century, and lived there evidently for a while, and found out what a ludicrous situation he's in. He's a man, maybe he had a family, and he had a castle with 50 bedrooms and 50 bathrooms and lots of marble staircases and all kinds of huge dining rooms. It was absolutely perfect for our needs. 200 of us settled in that castle. Some stayed much longer, some stayed not such a long time, but we were there. We were able to work a little bit. We were taken care of. Naturally, the women did most of the cooking, and we did some of the manual labor. We went out and helped farmers, but we took up quite a rhythm.
When you say you were taken care of, who was taking care of you? Was there an organization?
We had, first of all, the parent organization, the religious Zionist movement, they were in charge of ours as well as others. There were other similar training for Palestine camps, if you like to call them, in various parts of England. The one that I was in, we didn't have our own fields. We didn't work in that same sense. I did that a little later, but we did go out to farmers in the locale, and we helped them, and I'm sure they appreciate it, especially during harvest time.
And were there, you said there are 200 of you children, how many adults, and who were the adults?
Yes,
that
well,
were
we had a general manager. We had a general manager, an Englishman. I don't think he was Jewish. And he was overall in charge of the entire operation. Then we had madrichim, group leaders, who made sure that we behaved ourselves, that we did what we were supposed to do, educationally, in various other respects. They ran the place.
Were they English or Israeli? Or?
They were also of our own refugees. Yes.
And so they made sure that you were going through schooling and.
Well, we had no formal schooling. First of all, in England at that time, unless you were from an upper class family, your formal education ended at age 14 anyway in England. And those of us who didn't finish school had books available. We had, I wouldn't call it classes, but we had some ways of learning whatever it was that we wanted to learn. But formal education, there was none after, for me at least anyway, after I left school in Berlin.
What was your job? What sort of jobs were you doing?
Well, when I finally left this place, this castle, first of all, I went to another agricultural place, also in North Wales, not too far away, and wanted to continue my agricultural training. There we worked proper agricultural field work. Not our own fields, belonged to farmers, but we were organized and we worked, weeding and boosting soil and watering, all of these things. I realized within a year of that this could take forever. And my brother, who was in a similar situation agriculturally in a Manchester religious training farm, he moved into Manchester City.
Your younger brother?
My older brother.
Oh, your older
Yeah.
brother.
He was done with this idea, we can't wait, this can take forever, and so on. I want a normal life. So he went to Manchester. As soon as he'd settled down, called me in the place where I was and said, look, I'm here. Manchester is a civilized town, no agriculture. It's proper work, the kind that you might want to train yourself for so that you can become a career person of some sort. So what could you do? I mean, the only thing that I was able to do actually was to operate a sewing machine, because my father had one at home and he wasn't looking. I was playing on the sewing machine.
So he taught you a little bit about
I
tailoring?
learned just how to thread it up and how to make it work. So naturally, I went to a factory that was making uniforms, the war effort. And we made uniforms, and I was apparently a little bit more talented than some of the others. Remember, most of the men were being drafted for the army, so unless they were under draft age, they were working there, but mostly it was women. However, I seemed to show a little more talent than some of them, because they soon promoted me to foreman, and I stayed in Manchester, and I did that, and shortly after I settled down, that's when I got my younger brother from another part of England to join me. In the meantime, my older brother had to go into the service, and I stayed as a sewing machine operator throughout the war. After the war, I moved to London, because my brother had married this London girl, and they were living in London, and I figured nothing wrong with London, so I moved to London, where I incidentally met Anne eventually, but professionally, that was all I could do, is sew. So I went into the ladies' garment profession, and I started sewing ladies' garment, and I found it quite easy, and again I was promoted, but I realized that the ladies' garment industry is falling apart. How now? There was nothing else I could do. But Anne's brother was in the United States. He had come from Shanghai to the United States, West Coast. My brothers from England had in the meantime left England and went to the East Coast, New York. I was never even giving it any thought to live on the East Coast. To me, that was just not my cup of tea. But when we were in touch with Anne's brother in San Francisco, that seemed like a much better idea. So we moved to San Francisco, and I was able to change my profession, to come back to your question. I looked for ads and classified ads, and I found a job as a credit trainee. Credit being the American thing, and I knew nothing about it, but a very kind gentleman was kind enough to hire me, and I learned the retail credit business, retail banking. That's what I spent my working years while I was in the United States.
Okay. Obviously, this is all post-war, but I want to go back before the war is over yet. Where was your youngest brother? What had happened with him?
The youngest one or the second youngest? The second youngest is the one who made it to Israel. The youngest one came to England. That's the one.
I'm sorry, the second youngest one.
The second youngest one.
And his name?
Zeev / Willy. He was still left in Germany. He was 10 or 11 years old, and again, things were, the communication wires were just humming. My father said to him, listen, Sonny, this fellow, Yitzhak, he is taking children to Israel, to Palestine. You're going to go with him. It'll be a very nice thing. You will get there. And don't worry about it. You will get in touch again. Just follow this man. And he joined up with that group, and they went mostly underground through Europe and got to Yugoslavia from Berlin and spent 6 months with Yugoslavia, where they were boarded out to Jewish families. He stayed with a family by name of Herzog, as it so happens. He writes very kindly about them in his autobiography, which I just read yesterday to get myself updated. And
so your father is the one who sent him
to go, and he spent 6 months there, and then after that period, again sneaking through bushes and everything at night, hidden, went all the way from Yugoslavia to Syria, which was at that time not a country to be afraid of, and from Syria into Palestine.
Okay, we need to stop tape here, and then...
Steinberg.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, first of all, what was the younger brother's name that was in England with you?
Emil, E-M-I-L. He never changed his name, despite the fact that it's really a German name, but he kept it.
And was he, how, were you with him a lot? Were you able to be...
Yes, once we got together again in Manchester in probably late 1940, I would guess. We lived in a boarding house, Jewish kosher boarding house. There were several in Manchester. I'm sure my older brother and I, between us, had enough money to pay what it costs for the younger brother and me to be in that boarding house. We lived there. It was a small boarding house. They maybe had half a dozen people. So we were just part of the boarders there, and it was our home. We stayed there till 1945, and we ate our meals, all of our meals there, and we had friends over. The synagogue, as it happens, was a quarter of a mile down the road, and he had his bar mitzvah there, and I was, of course, in charge of preparing him. My older brother, he was in the Air Force, was stationed also not far from Manchester. He never got stationed anywhere else. He was in that Air Force, whatever facility, and so he came into town often enough. And that way I was able to do all the things that, under the circumstances, I could think of doing. I still belonged to this religious Zionist movement. I went to their regular meetings and saw to it that kid brother went to school, got himself a real English education. In fact, if I may add something a little bit funny here, when I picked him up at the station when he came to Manchester to join us, my older brother was not able to come. He had something else that he was set up with, and he said to me, just go to Central Station, pick him up, and bring him home. And so here he comes. I hadn't seen him for maybe 18 months. Here he comes, and I recognized him immediately and gave him a nice hug. And I said to him, Emil, and I started speaking to him in German. My English was still very poor. He didn't answer me. He just looked at me. And I said, in German again, why don't you answer me? So he kind of tried to indicate to me, I don't know any German. And the 18 months for a kid, that's pretty easy. He had forgotten his German, and I hadn't barely learned enough English because I was in North Wales. I was with my own group. We all spoke German or Yiddish, as the case may be. And so it was a strange feeling that you're picking up your brother and you don't have a common language. But my English, of course, got much better in a short period of time. And strangely enough, as he grew up, his German, fractured as it was still in his memory. But at the time when we met, and days after that, he couldn't come up with any German at all.
How old was he when you left?
Well, he was not yet 9 years old when he left, so this was about 10 and a half, maybe, something like that. And during that time, he had no German exposure whatsoever, so that he just grew up as an English schoolchild during that period. And
I'm sure he was taught that to do that. Do you think he was taught to do that as well?
yes, because again, he was mixed in with an English group of school children. he was staying with an English family after he was evacuated from London. And it was a natural transformation.
Were you, during all this time, were you able to communicate at all with any family members, or what were you hearing about your family back in Germany?
I knew only about my father, and the Red Cross allowed one sheet that was sort of like an air letter, one sheet with so many, you know, by size, that my father was able to send to us through the Red Cross. So we were in that very skimpy communication with our father. But what he told us about the fate of the women, I do not recall at all.
So there was no way you could communicate with your mother and sisters in Germany?
No. I want you to know, while I was at that castle in North Wales, sounds ridiculous, at that castle in North Wales, while I was up there, there were constantly instances of some of the people who lived with us there who were informed by whatever authority that their parents had died. So there was a lot of trauma there. Despite our, being so happy to be out and alive and free and so on, there was always somebody, oh, did you hear so-and-so heard that his parents just died in Auschwitz or this or that or the other. But there were confirmations. I did not know, except that when the war ended, I knew that if I hadn't heard by now, so I really was not sure until the end of the war whether the ladies, any of them survived them.
So you were getting information, you were hearing about what was happening over there. There were little bits of information that was getting through to you. Did you try and communicate or try and find?
Even though, honestly, I don't have any actual recollection, but it was just part of being with all of these people. Everybody constantly tried, and I was as much concerned as I could be, and yet was totally aware that there is an iron curtain, long term, that there is a barrier that prevents me from actually finding out. And to some degree, we said, no news is good news. If you haven't heard the bad news, maybe they're still living. That was just what all. But there was no way around that big block, that barrier.
So you had heard about Auschwitz then? It was
remember, concentration camps existed before the war. The thing is that they really didn't become extermination camps until the Germans found that that was the best solution to deal with all of those human beings that should have been fed, looked after.
So you knew that they were going to labor camps, but you didn't know to the extent of...
Not to that extent. There were enough news filtering through about all kinds of things happening, but really no specifics until the end of the war. I mean, when the Allied troops liberated the camps, it was still an enormous shock. It was still incredible. It was still unbelievable. This whole concept of man's inhumanity to man, even though I saw them beating up Jews in the street. But that was individual. But on a mass scale, from the top layer of German authority, Christians, again, if I may throw that in, was an immense shock.
How did the people, the English people, the non-Jews, and the people that weren't, part of your group, how were you treated there? Did you intermingle with them? Was there contact with, other British subjects? Or, how were you treated then?
The only contact you had with non-Jews were in the neighborhood where you lived. There was no animosity. Few people thought of me as an enemy, even though they knew maybe that my native language was German. But no, there was no animosity. And there was contact through work. But when you had social activities, it was Jewish. But when you had intermingling, there was no animosity.
You had mentioned about writing to your father. How often were you able to hear from him?
I think it was once a month. I think
And he also hadn't heard anything about his family?
No,
Or?
no. In fact, my father is probably had the same characteristic I had, is inclined to pretend that some bad things aren't really existing. I have the same tendency, and looking back, and even as you ask the questions, I think I must have inherited this from him, because I'm sometimes inclined to overlook things. Maybe that's my survival instinct, I don't know, maybe that was his too, but he did not at all elaborate.
Where were you when you found out the war was over?
I was in Manchester when VE Day, the victory over Europe, and in that interim, before VJ Day, I had moved to London. So I was in Manchester when our war was over, but the American war was still going on until a little later. A few months, I think, separated VE from VJ.
And I meant to ask you too, I mean, you said you lived in a castle and then you had a job, you lived in a boarding house. Was life difficult or was it relatively pretty good?
I would say it was relatively pretty good. The fact that we knew that there were people who were going through tremendous hardships, not only the Jews of Europe, but there was bombing, there were air raids, there was all kinds of war activities. Boys were sent overseas and so on. And despite all of that, we were as normal as the general population in Manchester was, or in other towns.
You said that you worked or you helped organize some of the air raid or the emergency.
Well, yeah, there was was not military, but it was basically on the same lines. Somebody had to take care of whatever air raids would come and whatever damage those air raids might incur. So we were trained pretty primitively, if I may say. So we got the uniform, we got the helmet, we were trained how to put out fires and things like that. And of course, Manchester, even though it's much less known than the air raids that London had and Coventry had, Manchester got pretty much bombed too, but mostly the industrial area, including a place where I worked that was bombed, was destroyed, and typically it was a smaller clothing factory making uniforms. It so happens that the woman was, the boss was the owner, and she came in and we were all gathered there and we saw that the factory had been destroyed. He said, well, typically English, there's nothing we can do, let's all go have a cup of tea and discuss what we're going to do after today. As it so happens, there were some bombs in residential areas, and I did have to move once. The place where I lived wasn't destroyed, but it was damaged and it became unsafe. I moved to another area. But that was just normal because that's what the general English population went through. The fact that I was a refugee had very little impact on my life during that period.
Can you recall some of the, like, when the air raids happened? I mean, were you ever involved? I guess to get a sense of what it was like to go through one of them.
Actually, there was never a bomb in the immediate vicinity where I was an air raid warden. We had to patrol, and we could see, especially there was a particular period when Manchester was evidently picked out for mass bombing. It was all in the business area, it was a different area. You could look from the street in the direction of downtown, so to speak, and you could see the whole place on fire. The whole sky was just like a gorgeous sunset when the whole sky is red. The whole place was on fire. This happened several times. But where I lived, where I would have had to function as an air raid warden, I never had the opportunity. And then, of course, we took turns. I wasn't on duty every night. We slept in air raid shelters, and it was just part of living in England at war.
Did you ever run into any anti-Semitism while you were there?
In England, I may have encountered a few incidents here and there. I'm sure that there were some people who didn't like us, but to be honest, I do not recall ever having really been smack in the middle of an anti-Semitic incident while in England.
And you were able to be close with your brothers, so you did have that family, that sense of family still, and celebrating holidays. And when it came time for like your sister's birthdays, would you sort of celebrate in their honor, or?
Just awareness, that's all. To this day, I know all of the birthdays, and I'm always aware today is which one's birthday.
You said you found out about them at Yad Vashem. When was that?
I believe it was in '92. Now one of our oldest son lives in Israel since 1982, and so we go periodically to Israel, and somewhere down the road we found out that Yad Vashem has records of those who perished in the Holocaust, and so we went there, I think it was '92, and found all of the names, all 5 of them.
So right after the war, what did you do right after the war? Did you search?
We probably inquired. I remember my older brother was more in charge than I was. I was sect fiddle, but we probably found out. And you see, there were lists of people who did survive, but we did not find those names among them. And it was just a given that if you didn't hear from them, that they perished. And I think my brother in Israel already did this before we did go to Yad Vashem, and he may have confirmed it for us. But to be perfectly honest, there have been some incidents, very, very few, where somebody suddenly appeared out of nowhere and claimed, hey, I am your cousin, your brother, your uncle, whatever. But they were so rare, and the idea of keeping an optimism inside was much harder than saying, well, 6 million died, among them another 4 sisters. That's the only way that we could see it, because supposing one of them would have gotten out before we had this confirmation and would have ended up in Argentina through some quirk of life, we would have surely found out about it. But the idea of keeping a flame of hope alive was more painful than to accept the fact that they were among the 6 million.
At what point did you realize?
It came gradually. I think by the time the war was over, I did not think that there was a chance that they would have survived. And then as time went on, each day, without necessarily being consciously aware, the realization grew that, of course, they didn't survive.
And what were the names of the sisters who perished?
My oldest sister was Peppy. She was 2 years older than I. My younger sister was Sophie. She was 2 years younger than I. Then came the brother. Then came Gerda, who was the third of the 3 girls, and the youngest one that one was born in '33 was Margot.
When did you finally see your father?
We were a little bit slow in getting reunited. The fact that he was there and that he was with my brother and we were working and raising children and this and that, the fact that he was there was a lot of satisfaction for us. My father came to San Francisco, to London. He visited us in London. So that was somewhere between 45 and 53. I don't remember now when it was. But he did come to visit, and he came again to San Francisco. As a matter of fact, we just came across a picture of him visiting us in San Francisco when he was the age that I am now. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. My father was an easygoing person, and he played with our children and talked about this and that, but the separation had been too long. I can't say that I really felt totally at home again with my father, even though he was a wonderful human being. But I don't know, maybe to some degree I said to myself, why couldn't we get the others, the women out? I don't know. Some of these things happen subconsciously.
Tell me about, when was the first time you saw him after
after
Germany.
he went to,
The first time you saw him after the war.
after the war. I don't remember what year it was, but he did come to see us in London.
Tell me about
So
that.
it was probably in the late 40s, early 50s. If my wife would be listening, she probably would remember it, but I
Tell
don't
me about
recall.
seeing.
Hmm?
Tell me about seeing him for the first time after all that time.
Yeah, well, it is somewhat what I just said to you. It wasn't easy. I was too much aware of what had happened to our family, and not that I blamed him for what happened, but there was these things, you don't do them consciously, you don't do them deliberately, but there was a certain reluctance to go back to the original relationship. And he did live in Israel, and we never went to see him in Israel. We saw him twice while he was still alive. By the time we made our first trip as a family to Israel, he had already passed away
When did he pass away?
in 1970.
And did he live near your brother?
He lived for a while in the same youth village where my brother was when he first came to Israel, until he was called up for army duty. He, being a tailor, picked up some tailoring there in that children's village. There were hundreds of children, and he did probably make clothes for them or whatever, but also was available for every kind of duty that they called on him to do. So he helped with the gardening, he helped in the kitchen, he helped with other things, but he was very content there. He felt that he has 4 children who survived, and grandchildren coming up, and he did not ever show that the whole thing very severely disturbed him. I mean, no more than you could expect under normal circumstances like these.
Tell me about meeting your wife. Where were you and how did you meet her?
Well, I was raised, boys stay out of the kitchen, and I was quite willing to stay out of the kitchen when I was growing up. So I lived in boarding houses. And when I moved to London, I looked in the London Jewish Chronicle for a place to live. I stayed temporarily with my brother. And soon enough found an ad in the paper, a Jewish family is looking to have a bedroom and, with full board, X number of pounds. And I called them up, and believe it or not, their name was Steinberg too. Just coincidentally, no
relation.
no. And I stayed with them for a while, and again, for no great particular reason, I decided I want to move to another place. Maybe being the only boarder was not what I wanted. I don't know. This was also a family of even survivors, as it happens, the Steinberg family. So anyway, I looked again for another place, and I found an ad in the paper where a Jewish lady was looking for a boarder in another part of London, Jewish part of London too. Anyway, the idea of moving into that area suited me, and I called her up, and she said to me, well, why don't you come over next Tuesday, 7 o'clock, and we'll see what we can set up. And when I came there and I talked to her, and I said, well, who else lives here? Oh, she says, I only have 2 lodgers. I have a girl who lives here, not related to me, and I had another lady, and she just moved to South Africa, so I have a vacancy. And I was really looking for a lady, but you look like a nice gentleman, and if you want to move in, the place is available. Next week you can move in. So I said, well, there's a girl there, doesn't bother me. In fact, she added, this girl is going to join her parents in America because they're in Shanghai, and they're going to come to America. Well, of course, things aren't always what they seem. I moved in. My brother had a car in London. My big brother, he took me to this place. He dropped off my baggage and me, and he went on his way, and I knocked at the door, walked in. It was winter, and there was a beautiful fireplace going, and there was one of those nice armchairs, and the lady who opened the door spoke to me, hi, Mr. Steinberg, good to see you, and so on and so forth. And, oh, this is the girl who lives here. And that girl wasn't a girl. She was a young lady. She was 19 years old. Her name is Anne, and she's my wife. You asked the question? Well, we got to know each other while I lived there, and this was in 47, and we were married 18 months later.
That's wonderful. And her maiden name?
Fuss, F-U-S-S. Fuss, you would pronounce it here.
Was she also a survivor?
She, like me, came with the Kindertransport. She is 4.5 years younger. So when I was 15, she was 11, I guess, when she came. And she lived in London and was evacuated because of the war to Bedford, and eventually came back to London. And this lady knew where I lived as a boarder, knew some member of her family. That's why my present wife, then young lady, came to live with her. And the idea of her parents coming from Shanghai to the States, of course, never materialized, again, for a technical reason. Their son, her brother, was able to come to the States because he was born in Germany. The American quota, immigration, says if you were born in Germany, the German quota. The brother is able to come. Her parents, also German, but that part of Germany at that time when the quota was set up for America was under Polish occupation, was considered Polish. He was considered Polish, which is very strange for German Jews to be considered. But anyway, so they couldn't go to America at all. They came, in fact, to England. We waited with our wedding for their arrival from Shanghai. And when they had settled down, we got married, and they for a while stayed with us in England and then found their own place.
That's wonderful. And your children, how many children?
Well, we have a son who was born in 1951. His name is Gerald, G-E-R-A-L-D. He was still born in London. We left England when he was about a year and a half old. My other two children were born in San Francisco. Doreen, she was born in 1956, and Alan, A-L-A-N, was born in 1962. We have a spread of 11 years, and they always tell their friends, oh, we were 3 single children. Because we really were able to, not that it's an ideal setup to have 3 children in an 11-year span, but it has advantage.
And your oldest lives in Israel now?
The oldest one, while he was an undergraduate at Berkeley, was given the opportunity to spend a year in Israel as part of his, I think, undergraduate studies. He accepted that and went to Israel for a year and then came back and continued his education in the States. He went to MIT and he went to Cornell and he got his master's at UC San Diego, got his PhD eventually and did some postgraduate work, but he had spent that 1 year in Israel. He had seen my brother at that time, and since I was always at least a half a Zionist, even though I never made that big decision, which a lot of my friends did. But when my son went to Israel and he came back, he had made up his mind basically that after he's got his education completed, he is going to go to Israel. In the meantime, while he was at college, he met a girl from Ottawa who was an undergraduate student while he was a graduate student. They fell in love. They got married in Ottawa. She was quite agreeable to make Aliyah, and so after their first child was born in the States, in Boston, they went in 1982 to Israel.
Okay, great. And I'll just real quickly mention, and you have 9 grandchildren.
Yes, we have 9 grandchildren. The first 4 or 5 are girls, then there's a boy, then there's some more girls, and then there's a boy, and then there are twin girls. But 2 boys, 7 girls.
That's Wonderful. Mazel tov. Look, we're going to stop tape, and we're going to look at pictures and meet your wife. Okay. I just wanted to just mention a fact. You had told me earlier that when your mother and sisters were picked up in Germany to go to Auschwitz, they were picked up in 1941?
I believe it was 41 years. I don't have the number right now in my head, but I'm sure.
But they were there for a while.
They were there for a while, yes. We know that, but they stayed there basically where they were until eventually they were picked up.
And then, I'm sorry, but they were in Auschwitz. They were actually in Auschwitz.
They were sent, according to the information that we have and that we saw at Yad Vashem, they were, they ended their life in Auschwitz.
But they had actually been there for about a year. You told me earlier they were actually there at the camp for about a year.
Yes.
I want to ask you, what would you say to people, you know, there are those who say it never happened. What would you say to them?
Well, you know, there are basically two kinds of people everywhere, in every religion and every culture. There are good people and there are bad people. And there are enough bad Christians to go around. There are also a lot of good Christians. I've seen them, I've met them, I've talked to them, I read about them, I hear about them. But Christianity, unfortunately, finds its raison d'etre, its reason for existence, because they say there was a person, Jesus. The Jews killed him. For that, we owe them eternal hatred. Now, anybody that says it didn't happen at all, or even tries to minimize it, is one of those people. There are lots of wicked people. There are people who murder their children, or murder their mother, or murder their neighbor. There are people who will hold up a person for $10 and they don't want any surviving witnesses and they'll shoot them. Thanks for the $10. So there are a lot of evil people. Now, some of those people who deny, they may not even be aware of it. They may be decent parents, they may be decent neighbors. But there is something intrinsically evil in a person who says, I have to deny something that I must know in my heart happened. There were Jews that were killed. There were innocent people. They could have been sent out. They could have been driven out of Germany. They could have been told, go wherever you want to. We don't allow you in this country. But the easiest solution for the Christian Germans and Christians from other countries too were fully collaborative, and that tendency carried over to some Christians in America. They cannot admit that they committed such an evil, so they say it never happened. At first it was, we can kill the Jews because they killed our Lord, but on such a mass scale, let's better say we didn't do it, it never happened. It's just a story. The Jews always tell lies, so it's one of the biggest lies. That's how I see it.
Can we prevent this from ever happening again?
Will it ever happen again? I don't know what the German mentality is this day. What I read, it is mostly the awareness what they did and some sort of remorse. But it could happen, first of all, in other cultures. People are still getting murdered on a mass scale. And then we have our enemies, the Arabs, or at least the fundamental Arabs, who are not at all unwilling to throw something into Israel that will blow up the entire Jewish population, and of course some of their own kind too. But again, the Arabs are certainly a strange people. When you read, if you try to be very objective, I try to be objective even though I have my prejudices, but some of the things that they say that we did all of this to them, and therefore they can do whatever they want to us. And they only pick on the Jews who live in Israel. I don't see an Arab being anti-Semitic in any other country. But as far as destroying Jews because they're Jews and we want where they are, that I can see as a possibility. And I don't necessarily see that other countries like the United States would be totally be committed to save Israel if it ever were attacked. I don't see it. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see it.
And I meant to ask you also, did you ever go back to Berlin after the war?
I went back once. The Jewish community that is now still in Berlin got together with the city government, and they invite groups of former Berliners who were kicked out to come back, and they were under different headings. The one that I was invited, and the only one I would have accepted anyway, was as a Jewish school reunion. And there were hundreds of thousands of Jewish kids taught in those schools, and I did join such a group, and I did go to Berlin, and I only met one person at that reunion whom I have been in touch with somewhat prior, and he's the one who told me, we are going, if you write to them, you can go too. I did meet up with them. Other than that, all the other people that were there at the reunion, it's been about 150, and of course there were the school children plus their spouses. So I did go there. I went through 1 week of this reunion thing. We had prearranged at that time that we would combine it, since we were already halfway to Israel, and since our son lives in Israel, that we would combine it and go from there to Israel. And to tell you the truth, it was like a cleansing. I was glad to have left Berlin behind. I was not inspired by that visit at all. You know, this is where I lived. We went to the house even where we lived. I could not emotionally get too close to that. And as it happens, it started to rain after we were walking around, and I was glad to get back on the train and back to the headquarters of the reunion. But when I came to Israel, and this was certainly not my first visit to Israel, it was like a cleansing.
When was that reunion?
In 92. Just 4 years ago.
That was your first visit then. And so you felt more at home. You had, excuse me, in Israel, but you felt it was cathartic for you to see it and leave Berlin behind. And
yeah, it was not, in any sense, a kind of reunion, emotional reunion like you would have maybe with people that you had gone through some other thing with, whether it was a social event or religious event. You know, you might have Londoners who all meet here, things like that. This was different because I went home, but I did not emotionally, not spiritually.
it wasn't home anymore. It wasn't home anymore.
No. And at the same time, I did not feel angry being there either. I feel angry about all of this happening and why it happened and who made it happen. But Berlin, like I say, it was shallow. It was a shallow experience.
Okay, why don't we meet your wife? Why don't we take a break?
Okay.
And we'll meet your wife. Okay, could you introduce us to the lovely woman sitting next to you?
Could I introduce her? Yes. I'd like you to meet the lady I talked about earlier. She is my wife. She's been my wife since 1948, mother of our 3 children. Her name is Anne, A-N-N-E. It started off with Annelies. We just left the L-I-E-S off, and it was very easy. Anne is a very nice English name, and we are here as residents of Leisure Road since 1986. And while I do gardening and things like that, she is very busy with Hadassah, and I think she looks pretty good for a lady that I've been married to for 48 years.
Mazel tov. And where were you born?
I was born in Germany, in Halle. It's near Leipzig, Saxony.
And when did you leave Germany?
I left Germany in April of 1939 for England. with the Kindertransport, children's transport, not in London.
And that's where you met?
No, we met much later.
I'm sorry, later, but you met in
Later,
London.
Yes, I went back to London later on. I was evacuated with school when the war broke out. Like all the children, refugees and native born and the children. Beginning of the war, we left with the school, the children, and were billeted with different families in each countryside. Actually, we were only 25 miles from London, but that was still much safer than being in London.
At what point did you tell your children of your experiences?
And I probably told my children much earlier than Henry did. But they knew right when we were evacuated that we were from Germany. And I told them, I'm sure that my parents lived in Shanghai, but much later that they comprehend. But Henry did not, he did not tell his children about his mother.
Our
No.
The children.
Hmm?
He did not tell our children, about his sisters and mother till we were almost on our way to Israel in 1972.
And why did you wait so long to tell them?
Well, actually, I don't remember, number one, that I didn't tell them, and I don't remember why I didn't tell them. And if Anne did tell them and they didn't come to me, I cannot quite understand that at all. But it is true, generally speaking, I mentioned that before, that I kind of avoid negative things, sometimes to my detriment, but I guess it must be like a survival type instinct, emotional survival. I do not remember when I told them, and if I told them late in their growing up period, I can't really give you a reason, a specific reason. I didn't try not to tell them, but maybe I figured maybe next year, I don't know.
I think we didn't, and you told him at that time because he knew when we would be with his brother in Haifa, and he probably would go back and mention about his family and everything like that, and we didn't want them to, be shocked at the time.
But they would know about it before.
So they would know about it before. I think that was his reason. And that probably was right.
Yeah, okay, well, the oldest one was already
Oh, he was
21 years old.
Maybe you told him, but I know the younger ones who didn't.
Well, we may not, certainly possible that I didn't go into it.
I asked Henry, and I'll ask this of you too. What can we have learned from all this? How can we prevent something like this from ever happening again?
I don't think they've learned anything. That's my opinion. Otherwise, things wouldn't be the way they are in the world right now.
What can we do to prevent it from happening again?
Yeah. Very difficult to say, actually.
If I may say, what you're doing may be the best method of preventing it. Spread the word, what evil does and what good does, and choose.
Very well put. Thank you. Is there anything else that you'd like to add or say?
I don't think so.
Oh.
He's my spokesman. But in some things.
Great. Well, why don't we take a look at some pictures of your family and see how
My family?
the children and the grandchildren. Thank you.
Where do we do that? This is a picture of my father, Isaac Steinberg, and it was taken shortly after World War I, when he was approximately 30 years old. It comes from an old ID that I found among the things that she found him.
Okay. And was this taken in Germany?
This was taken in Berlin, in Germany. This is a picture of my mother, Hannah Helene Steinberg, and this was taken approximately 1938, at which time she was about 42 2 years old.
And what was her maiden name?
Her maiden name was Fensterheim, and this picture was taken for a passport, which everybody did in case they are going to leave the country. So we all had pictures taken about that time.
But she was never able to leave the country.
She was not able to leave the country. She stayed at the address where we had lived until she was picked up and sent to Auschwitz. This is a picture of me, Heinrich Steinberg. I was 16 years old at the time, and it was shortly after I arrived in England.
And what year was that?
1939 or 1940.
And was this taken for a passport?
This was taken for identity card. This is a picture of my oldest brother, David Steinberg, but this was taken around 1933 when he was about 13 years old, taken in Berlin, Germany.
And where did he end up? Where did he end up living?
He now lives in San Francisco. He came to California in the late 50s from New York, had gone to England from Germany prior to the war, about January 1939. This is my second sibling, my oldest sister. Her name was Peppy, P-E-P-I, Steinberg. Again, this was taken in 1938 or 39 for passport needs that did not materialize. She stayed in Berlin and ended up being picked up, sent to Auschwitz, where she died along with my mother and her other 3 sisters. This is a picture of my second sister. She was 2 years younger than I. This picture was taken in Berlin for passport purposes. She is approximately 13 or 14 years old.
And her name?
Her name was Sophie, S-O-F-I-E.
Steinberg.
Steinberg.
Okay.
This is a picture of my brother Willy, who lives in Israel. His name is Ze'ev now. And this picture was also taken for passport purposes around 1939. He would have been about 10 years old at that time. He is the one who made his way to Palestine during the war years and lives now in Haifa, has 2 children, has a wife, 2 children, and 3 grandchildren born in Israel.
And his name is Steinberg?
Ze'ev Steinberg. On the left of this picture is me, Henry Steinberg, and on the right of the picture is my youngest brother, Emil. He is the one who came to England also, and this picture is taken in England approximately end of 1940 when we were reunited after he joined me and my brother in Manchester. This picture is taken in Manchester. I need to add that this brother did not have a good long life. At age 60, he died after he had bypass surgery some years earlier, and he leaves a wife, lives in Los Angeles, leaves a wife, 3 children, and 4 grandchildren. This picture shows 4 girls. These are my 4 sisters. It was taken out of our living room window in Berlin in 1938. The only one I do not have a passport photo of is the lower left picture of Gerda Steinberg. Holding her is the oldest sister, Peppy Steinberg. On the right-hand side, the upper person is Sophie Steinberg, holding our youngest sister, Margot Steinberg. This is a enlarged passport photo of my youngest sister, Margot Steinberg. This was taken in 38 also. She is approximately 5 years old at the time, and she is the fourth of the 4 girls who, together with my mother, perished in Auschwitz. On the left of this picture is my older brother, David. The picture was taken in 1939, and on the right I am, and behind us is the castle, which is in North Wales, and that was my permanent address. The first permanent address in England. We were sent there, 200 children, all between 15 and 17, because we had spent the first 2 weeks in England near the coast. The war had broken out, and we were sent there and spent as much time there as we intended to.
And how long did you live there?
I myself lived there for about 10 months.
Okay, and that's Henry Steinberg.
Henry Steinberg. I am Henry Steinberg, and I'm on the left of this picture. In the center of the picture is my wife, Anne Steinberg, holding a fairly newborn baby in 1956. And on the right of the picture is our firstborn, Gerald, and he is approximately 5 years old. The picture is taken in San Francisco in the living room of the house where we had just moved to a few months earlier.
And the baby's name?
The baby's name is Doreen, D-O-R-E-E-N.
Your daughter. Your daughter.
Our daughter.
And you have a third child who was born, what, 6 years later?
Our third child, another boy, his name is Alan, A-L-A-N, Steinberg, and he was born 6 years later, and he still lives in the San Francisco Bay Area, whereas the young man on the right is in Israel, where he moved to in 1982. This is a photograph of our youngest son, Alan Steinberg, and it is a wedding picture. On that day, he married the young lady on the left of the picture, Leslie Gottesman, and she is also from the San Francisco Bay Area. The wedding took place in the North Bay in San Rafael, and it took place in August of 1989. This is a picture of my son Alan's and his wife's children. In the middle is Joshua, and he is about 3 years old, and to the left is Rachel, and to the right is Danielle, and they are approximately less than a year old when this picture was taken, which is about 6 to 8 months ago.
In 1996?
Yeah, 1995 or early 96. This is a picture of my daughter's 2 daughters, Elisa on the left, Kaylee on the right, and this was taken in 1996 in Los Angeles.
And your last name is Hill?
The last name is Hill. This is a picture of my son who lives in Jerusalem. He is the tall one in the middle. To the right of the picture is his wife Connie. To the left, the taller lady is their oldest daughter Hadara. And the next one is on the right, Sigal. And the next one is on the left, Yael. And the boy in the middle is Benjamin. This was taken in 1995 in Ottawa, Canada.
And his name, your son's name? Your son's
Steinberg.
His first name?
Oh, Gerald Steinberg. This is the last picture that I have of my youngest brother, Emil Steinberg. He passed away in 1990, and this picture was taken a few months before his death in 1990 in Los Angeles. This is a picture of our visiting my brother in Haifa. On the left is my brother Zeev Steinberg. Next to him, his wife Zafira Steinberg, and I am the next person on the picture. And next to me is my wife Anne. It was taken in 1992 in Israel.
And your name?
My name is Henry Steinberg.
Is this taken in Haifa?
In Haifa. This is a picture of a Jewish summer camp, and it was taken in 1935. I am age 12, and I, Henry Steinberg, am the first one on the left and the back row.
And you said this is after Hitler separated.
This was in 1935. Hitler came to power in 33, and there was complete segregation. There were no mixed camps between Jews and non-Jews. This is a picture of me, Henry Steinberg, and it was taken a few days after my arrival in England, and the tent that you see in the background was our accommodation for the first 2 weeks. When we arrived in August of 1939, they had bunks in there, a number of bunks, and we slept there, and we had other tents where we ate, and we had some tents also for other activities. And it was the first picture that I recall having been taken of me after arriving in England.
Where in England is it?
This is in Kent. It's in the city, or outside the city of Ashford, in Kent, southern England.